Now let's start off with today. So yesterday I explained you all what a charge sheet is. I'll just give you all a recap. So a charge sheet is a formal report which is prepared by the police. It contains information which they have received from the informant, the statement of witnesses, and the specifications of the offense, and all the evidences that they have collected, and that whole report which they prepare and they file in the court is called the charge sheet. Now, depending on the type of the offense which is committed, each charge sheet will contain different types of documents. For example, there is a medical legal case. For example, there is a case of accident. So that particular charge sheet will contain not only the FIR and the statement of witnesses, but it will also contain doctor's medical certificate. If the offense which is committed is say of forgery, 467, 468, or say 471, in such a scenario, the police will investigate the matter. What they will do, they will have the forged document. They will collect the specimen signature of the accused. They will send it for handwriting expert's opinion. So in such a scenario, the charge sheet will also contain expert opinion, that is the opinion of the handwriting expert. So depending on the kind of offense and the kind of investigation that is done, the documents in the charge sheet will change. Now, let's answer a few other queries which every student or a lawyer will have. Yesterday, I explained you all that if every charge sheet needs to be filed within 60 or 90 days, depending on the case. For example, if the offense that is committed is punishable with imprisonment for less than 7 years, then the time limit for filing the charge sheet is 60 days. So mind you, the time limit is given because accused is in custody. If the accused is not in custody, there's no time limit. But if accused is in custody and if the charge sheet is not filed for an offense which is punishable with 7 years, if the charge sheet is not filed within 60 days, the accused will get bail by default. Of course, he has to comply with the necessary bail formalities. Now, let us see what is further investigation. I want you all to know one thing. Police can never stop investigating the matter. Even after they have filed the charge sheet in the court, they can still continue to investigate the matter, and if they collect some further material even after the charge sheet is filed, they can file it in the court at any point of time before the trial is concluded. That particular document which is filed after the charge sheet is already filed is called supplementary charge sheet. So supplementary charge sheet is nothing but an extension of the earlier charge sheet which was filed in the court. Now, sometimes it so happens, there are some cases which are, a lot of accused are involved in it, and new evidences keep on coming up. So they cannot keep holding on to the charge sheet. They file the charge sheet. For example, you take a case of bomb blast. Now, in bomb blast cases, say for example, I think I should give you all the example of train bomb blast. So if you all recollect, bombs were placed in various trains. So in that case, there were multiple FIRs which were registered, and charge sheets came to be filed within 90 days. But the investigation continued beyond the period of 90 days. What happened is, even after the charge sheet was filed, police came to know that there were many more accused who were involved. They were not charge sheeted in the first charge sheet because while investigation, they had not come to know of all the accused which were involved. Sometimes after the period of 90 days is over, a particular witness may come to them and say, oh, I have seen this person keep this bag in the train on such and such day. So that's additional statement of the witness gets recorded. They try to apprehend that accused. Now that accused is apprehended after a period of 90 days when the first charge sheet is already filed. So what happens in such a scenario? They continue the investigation, they prepare a supplementary charge sheet, and that supplementary charge sheet can be filed, and additional accused can be charge sheeted in that supplementary charge sheet. So what I want to explain you all is investigation of the police can never come to a hold. It can continue till the end of the trial. Now, how are criminal proceedings initiated in the court? So what I explained you was how a charge sheet is filed. Now, yesterday, if you all recollect, I had explained you all how the proceedings come to be initiated. It can be two ways. If you remember, I had explained you that if the police do not register FIR, you will go to the superintendent of police. If the superintendent of police also does not take cognizance of your letter or the complaint which you have given, then what do? Then you file a complaint of facts which is constituting an offense and lodge it before the magistrate. So that is the first point. How criminal proceedings are initiated in the court upon receiving a complaint of facts which constitute an offense. So that is called as a private complaint. Second scenario, how proceedings are initiated in the court, I have already explained you all. We have been talking about it since yesterday. That is upon a police report of such facts being filed in the court. There is a third scenario also. Sometimes the criminal proceedings can be initiated in the court in a third scenario. I'll give you an example. I had a 138 matter in Mulund court. I was for the complainant. The accused had filed a false affidavit in the court. Immediately when we came to know that the affidavit is false, we brought it to the notice of the court. As soon as the court came to know that the affidavit which has been filed in the judicial proceeding is a false document, it's a false affidavit, the court immediately took note of that offense and a perjury proceeding was immediately started. Of course, we had also made a perjury application, but even if we do not make such an application, and if court, upon information received from any person other than a police officer or upon his own knowledge that such offense has been committed, can start a criminal proceeding in the court. So these are three cases in which the court proceedings come to be started in a criminal court. Before I explain you the procedure of the trials in each court, I want you all to understand the different types of trials. Now these trials are categorized into 4 types depending on the seriousness of the offense. Always remember, the more serious the offense is, the more elaborate the procedure will be. Because if the offense is serious, our constitution, our criminal jurisprudence wants to give the rights, every right to the accused to defend himself. Because if the offense is serious, the punishment which will be imposed upon him will also be of a higher nature. The penal provisions are more stricter for a serious offense. So warrant trial and summons trial, these are 2 types of cases. Now warrant trial, offense punishable with death penalty, imprisonment for life and imprisonment exceeding 2 years. If any offense is punishable with imprisonment exceeding 2 years, then warrant trial will be applicable for that particular offense. Now, warrant trial is divided into 2 categories. One is sessions trial and other is trials before the magistrate. Now, any offense which is punishable with 7 years and more, so offense punishable with death penalty, imprisonment for life and imprisonment exceeding 7 years, then that particular trial will be at the sessions court. So I'll give you a small example. If I lodge or if I'm facing a trial, I'm facing an offense of murder, it is punishable with life. So my trial will be conducted before the sessions court. Similarly, if a complaint against me is registered for theft or say for simple hurt, and the offense which for which I am for which the FIR is registered against me is the punishment for that is less than 7 years, then my trial will be conducted before the magistrate. Now, trials before the magistrate are also again of two types. Cases instituted on a police report and cases instituted otherwise than on a police report. Now, I'll give you an example here. Yesterday, I think I'll move to another example. I don't want to continue the sandwich vendor today. So, I'll give you another example. Suppose I am giving an exam in college and I am caught copying. I have the question paper and the answer paper already below my supplement. I am caught copying. The student sitting next to me who's also appearing for the exam comes to know that I have probably leaked the question paper and I have come with the answer key and I'm just copying the answers from the answer key. The student who is sitting next to me will obviously be aggravated. He will inform the examiner. He will inform the principal. If they don't take any action against me, he will go to the concerned police station and lodge an FIR. The police will investigate the matter, prepare a charge sheet and file a charge sheet in the magistrate court. Now, this will be a case instituted on a police report. Now, let's continue the same example. Now, this student who went to the police station, they did not register the FIR saying, this is a petty offense. It's not a racket. She didn't have the question paper or the answer key. You're just coming and lying here. They don't take him seriously. But he has all the necessary documents to prove the case against me. So what he does, he compiles a complaint, annexes all the documents. He annexes the question paper and the answer key which I had because he's obtained it from the principal, and he files a complaint. So this will come under the category of case instituted otherwise than on a police report. So if magistrate takes cognizance of that student's complaint and issues a process against me, the trial which will be conducted before the magistrate will be a warrant trial, but case instituted otherwise than on a police report. Summons trial. Offense punishable with less than 2 years. Any offense which is punishable with less than 2 years, the procedure for conducting that trial will be summons trial. All the summons trials are conducted before the magistrate courts. Summary trial. Petty offenses. All the petty offenses, again, there are some petty offenses which are tried in special court. For example, there are some petty offenses under the BMC Act. So those petty matters go before the BMC court at Shindewadi and at Vile Parle. Like, I'll give you a small example. Say I have taken occupation of a particular flat even before the builder has obtained the completion certificate for the necessary project. Now, I have committed an offense which is only punishable with fine of rupees 2000 under the Mumbai Municipal Corporation Act. So this becomes a petty offense. It is only punishable with fine. So the procedure for conducting that particular trial will not be elaborate, it will be small. Because in most of these cases, the accused come and plead guilty before the court. So this is a summary trial. So I'll be dealing with the detailed procedure, but I hope I'm clear with what is warrant trial. So under warrant trial, there are two categories. For serious offenses, there is a sessions trial, and for offenses which are punishable with less than 7 years, the trials are conducted before the magistrate. Even in warrant trial before the magistrate, there are two categories. Cases instituted on a police report and cases instituted otherwise than on a police report, that is a private complaint. Then there is summary trial, offenses punishable with less than 3 months or with fine. They fall under the category of petty cases and the procedure is of summary trial. Now, how does the proceeding commence before the magistrate? Suppose a charge sheet is filed by the police for the offense under section 300, that is murder. Say for example, a particular accused has committed murder and he has committed an offense under section 376, that is rape. Police have finished the investigation within 90 days. Their charge sheet is ready. They will go and file the charge sheet before the magistrate. Mind you, even if the trial is a sessions trial, see, the offense which I am talking about is rape and murder, which are punishable with life imprisonment or death. In such a scenario, obviously, this case will be tried by the sessions court, but the charge sheet will be filed before the magistrate court, because the rule is every proceeding commences before the magistrate. So the charge sheet will be filed before the magistrate. Magistrate will take cognizance of the charge sheet. He will issue summons or warrant. Now, if the accused is in custody, in the example which I have told you, in all probabilities, the accused will be in custody because he would not have been granted bail because he is charged of a serious offense of rape and murder. So in all probabilities, he will be in custody. He will be produced from custody before the concerned magistrate. On the day he is produced before the magistrate, the day the charge sheet is filed, he will be produced before the magistrate and he will be supplied with the copy of the complaint or the charge sheet. So in this particular example which I am talking about, he will be supplied with the copy of the charge sheet. And after that, because the particular offense is triable by the Court of Sessions, the magistrate will commit the case to the Court of Session, since it is exclusively triable by the Court of Session. Now, for example, there is another matter. When I have committed an offense of, say, cheating, I have cheated a particular businessman to the extent of, say, 10 lakh rupees. I took the goods from him. I promised him that as soon as I receive the goods, I will make the payment. After receiving the goods, I sell it in the open market. I bear the profits, but I refuse to make the payment to the supplier. The supplier is aggrieved and he makes a complaint against me. He lodges a FIR. FIR doesn't get registered. He lodges a complaint. The concerned magistrate, after going through the complaint, can issue summons or warrant against me. As soon as a summons or a warrant is issued against me, I will attend the concerned court. After I attend the concerned court, I will be immediately supplied with the copy of the complaint. Here, I am supplied with the copy of the complaint because it's a private complaint. I'm trying to explain you all in what scenario the accused will be supplied with the copy of the charge sheet and in what scenario he will be supplied with the copy of the complaint. So since this was a private complaint, I will be supplied with the copy of the complaint. This is how the proceedings before the magistrate commence. Now, there are certain cases in which the charge sheet needs to be filed directly in the sessions court. For example, NDPS, MOCA, UAPA. If any of the person has committed an offense under MOCA or UAPA, that is unlawful activities, say NDPS, that is narcotic drugs, in such a scenario, there are special notified codes for conducting trials under these particular acts. The government issues a notification and only those specially appointed courts can conduct these trials. So in such a scenario, the charge sheet will be filed directly before the special court and not before the magistrate court. This is only in certain exceptional scenarios. Otherwise, the rule is commencement of proceedings is always before the magistrate. The charge sheet gets filed before the magistrate. If the particular offense is triable exclusively by Sessions Court, the charge sheet will be committed to the Court of Sessions, and then the trial will commence before the Sessions Court. But in certain exceptional cases, the charge sheets needs to be filed directly in the special court, that is at Sessions Court. Now, one more thing which I wanted to tell you all here. Let's come back to this slide of warrant trial. So here I gave you a general rule that if the offense is punishable with 7 years and above, the trial is conducted by Sessions Court. But there are certain cases like, for example, forgery of a valuable security. Though it is punishable with 10 years, the trial is to be conducted before the magistrate. So there are very few offenses in IPC which are though punishable with 10 years. So see, I gave you a general rule. If anybody would ask you, forgery of a valuable security, where will the trial be conducted? Your answer will be Sessions Court, because I just gave you a general rule. But no, this is a general rule, but always to ensure whether a particular offense will be tried by the Sessions Court or the Magistrate Court, you must look at the schedule in CRPC. I just want to show you all this schedule once. I don't know if all of you all have the 3-in-1 with you all, but there is a schedule in CRPC which gives you the details of punishment, whether a particular offense is cognizable or non-cognizable, bailable or non-bailable, and by what court it has to be tried. So always remember, whenever you are confused or whenever you want to check that this particular offense, whether it's bailable, cognizable, and by which court it has to be tried, you have to look at the schedule of CRPC. Just look at schedule 1 of CRPC, you will get all the information about what kind of a trial will be conducted for this particular offense. I hope I'm clear on this. I explained you about the commencement. Now let us come to the procedure. Now procedure before the Sessions Court. Now procedure before the Sessions Court, that is warrant trials procedure before the Sessions Court, is very, very similar to the procedure before the warrant tribal case of before the magistrate. Sessions tribal procedure is given from section 225 to 237 in CRPC. Now trial before a court of session. Trial to be conducted by a public prosecutor. Always remember, for any state case, there is a public prosecutor who represents the state. And for the accused, obviously, he will appoint a lawyer of his own choice. Sometimes the complainant, or maybe they don't have faith on the public prosecutor, or they want to put in extra efforts to ensure that the accused goes behind bars, the complainant can also appoint a watching advocate. A watching advocate ideally is not supposed to address the court. Watching advocate of the complainant only keeps a watch on the trial, as the name itself suggests. They are supposed to assist the public prosecutor in whatever way that they can, and at the most they can submit arguments in writing, but they cannot conduct the trial themselves. Of course, there is section 302 in CRPC which says that a complainant can appoint a lawyer, but that is under exceptional circumstances before the magistrate. Sometimes these orders get allowed. Otherwise, the general rule is that for the state there is a public prosecutor. Now, trial to be conducted by the public. The first step in the sessions trial is opening case for the prosecution. So after the accused is supplied with the copy of the charge sheet, the matter is adjourned. On the next date, the public prosecutor is supposed to open the case of the prosecution. Now, what do you mean by opening the case of the prosecution? The prosecutor, by opening the case, is supposed to explain to the court as to on what ground are they seeking framing of the charge. They have to explain the details or the specifications of the charge, why the particular charge should be put against the accused. They are supposed to explain what evidence is there against the accused, statement of witnesses. So in short, they are supposed to go through the charge sheet and open the case of the prosecution. After the prosecutor opens the case and explains to the court about the particular offense which has been committed by the accused, after that, the advocate for the accused can appear, and if he is of the opinion that there is not enough material against the accused, there is not enough material to explain the charge to the accused, in such a scenario, the advocate for the accused will file a discharge application. So, what do you mean by a discharge application? A discharge application means an application telling the court that there is not enough material against me to frame the charge. I should therefore be discharged from the present case. So when there is not enough material in the charge sheet, I'll give you an example. Now say for example, I am charge sheeted for the offense of forgery. Now the allegation against me is that I am a contractor. I undertake contracts on behalf of the BMC. Now, when I undertake contracts for and on behalf of BMC, before I'm given a contract, I am supposed to give them some performance certificates of my past, what kind of projects I have undertaken, etc., etc. Now, the allegation against me is that I have prepared forged and fabricated performance certificates, and on the basis of those fabricated performance certificates, I have obtained a tender from the Mumbai Municipal Corporation, and by cheating the Mumbai Municipal Corporation, I have obtained the contract, and I have probably also siphoned off some funds of the BMC. I may have taken money, but I may have not done that part of the contract. So these are the allegations against me of cheating and forgery. Say, a BMC officer has lodged a complaint against me at the concerned police station. The police have investigated the matter and filed a charge sheet. The prosecutor has opened the case and explained everything. Now, the allegations against me are absolutely serious. Cheating and forgery. Probably siphoning funds from the public exchequer. But whether there is enough evidence, whether there is enough material in the charge sheet to prove the case against me is equally important. The charge may be of most serious nature, but whether the prosecution has enough material to prove the case or not is equally important. So, for example, these are the allegations, but in the charge sheet, they have not annexed the concerned forged performance certificate. They do not have any opinion from the lab saying that this document is forged. In such a scenario, how are they going to prove the charge of forgery against me? If they are not able to prove the charge of forgery against me, they may even fail to prove the charge of cheating against me. Probably they do not have a statement of any person who comes forward and says that no, Mrs. Poonam Ankleshwarya had not done this particular bridge or had not constructed this road at, say, Odisha, and the performance certificate which she has given you of building a road at Odisha is false. If they do not have statement of any such person saying that this performance certificate is false, they do not have the forged and fabricated performance certificate in the charge sheet, they do not have a expert opinion to say the document is forged, how are they going to prove the charge against me? In such a scenario, I will appoint a lawyer who will file an application of discharge saying that there is not enough material to frame the charge against my client. the discharge application will be heard, and obviously if the judge is convinced, I will be immediately discharged from the case without going further, without undergoing the whole ordeal of trial. Just on this ground that there is not enough material to frame the charge against me, I will be discharged from the case. Now let's come to scenario 2. There is enough evidence against me. The prosecution has opened the case. There is enough evidence against me. So the court will frame the charge against me. After the charge is framed, there will be prosecution. Prosecution will start producing its witnesses. All the witnesses will come. The advocate of the accused will have a right to cross-examine them. Of course, how to cross-examine, that's a different art and that's a different skill altogether. There were a lot of webinars which were conducted in this lockdown as to how, with regard to the art of cross-examination. So let's come back to our procedure. So after discharge, if the discharge application is rejected, the trial will continue. The charge will be framed against me because court has come to a conclusion that there is enough material to frame the charge. Then the prosecution will start producing all its witnesses turn by turn, and the advocate of the accused will conduct the cross-examination. After the evidence of the prosecution is over, the advocate for the accused will take a call whether he wants to give any defense evidence, if they want to put any witness in the box or not. And then obviously there will be a judgment. So this is the basic procedure. There are little differences here and there. Say, before trial, say summons trial. Summons trial, few stages will be skipped because the offenses are not so serious. But the basic procedure is this: opening the case of the prosecution, then discharge, then the prosecution witnesses will come, then the defense witnesses, and then there will be arguments by both the sides. Then there will be the final judgment. Now the procedure in the case instituted otherwise than a police report. Let me take you through this procedure because the procedure there is slightly different. Here what happens is it is governed under from section 244 to 247. Here the evidence for the prosecution is taken first. That is under section 244. The witnesses or the statement of the witnesses are recorded, and after that an application can be preferred under section 245(2) for discharge. And after that, the procedure where the accused is not discharged, then the evidence of the defense is taken up, and after that, of course, there is acquittal or conviction. So there is very minor difference in the procedure, but the basic procedure remains the same. Now let's come to the principles of fair trial. Of course, I had told you yesterday that we follow the adversarial system in our country. So every accused is presumed to be innocent. There are some cases where there is a presumption against the accused. For example, I'm sure all of you all would know Negotiable Instruments Act. In Negotiable Instruments Act, there is a presumption against the accused that he is presumed to be guilty unless proved otherwise. So in Negotiable Instruments Act, it is for the accused to bring it before the court that the check which was dishonored was for particular XYZ reason. It is for him to bring it otherwise before the court. And once he brings it otherwise before the court, if the presumption is rebutted by the accused, then the burden falls on the complainant to prove his case. So in some exceptional cases, there is a presumption against the accused. But in general, the rule is presumption of innocence. Another principle of fair trial which needs to be kept in mind is independent, impartial, and a competent judge. Of course, that's not in our hands, but that is one of the principle of fair trial. Knowledge of accusation. So when the charge is framed, it is very, very important for the concerned magistrate or the concerned judge to explain the charge to the accused. If the charge is not explained to the accused, it's an irregularity. The accused should know as to what charges are framed against him. Only if he knows what charges are framed against him can he prepare his strategy of defense. So therefore, it is very, very important to have knowledge of accusation. Right to open trial. It is important that the trial is conducted in an open court where even public is allowed to enter the court and sit. You all would have seen that a trial is never ever conducted in a closed chamber. It is always conducted in the open court. So every accused has a right to an open trial. There are very few cases where the trial is not open, that is in camera. That is because of the sensitive nature of the trial. I'll give you an example. For example, there is a sessions trial which is pending, where a lady has filed a complaint of rape against an XYZ person. After the prosecution has opened its case, and the accused has not made any discharge application, then the second step is prosecution will put its witnesses in the box. Obviously, the first choice of the witness is always the complainant itself. So the prosecution will put the victim in the box. The victim of offense of rape will come in the box. The lady may feel awkward to talk about the accusation in the open court. She may not be in a position to explain what exactly happened in front of so many people. It will obviously be awkward for her. So in such a scenario, her statement will be recorded in a closed courtroom. So it is recorded in the courtroom, not in the chamber, mind you. Only thing is, all the litigants who have no connection with the concerned matter and the advocates who are not connected with the concerned matter are directed to leave the court. Only the litigants who have any interest in the said matter will remain inside the court, and the advocate for the accused and the public prosecutor will be inside the court. So only in certain scenarios the trial is in the closed courtroom. Otherwise, every accused has a right to open trial. Right to free legal aid. For example, there is an accused who is charged of, say, dacoity, and the charge sheet has been filed, say, within 90 days. The trial has begun in the sessions court. He may be charged of, say, dacoity, unlawful assembly, 2-3 serious offences, but he is not able to afford an advocate. He has a right to appoint an advocate from the legal aid panel when he is produced before the court on the day the charge sheet is filed, or maybe after that the next day. He can tell the court that he does not have a lawyer. Even if he does not tell the court and his lawyer is absent, it is the duty of the sessions judge to ask him that you don't have a lawyer, your lawyer has not come today. Have you appointed one? If he says yes, okay, fine. If he says no, then it is the duty of the judge to ask him, do you want a lawyer from the free legal aid? So every accused has a right to free legal aid. Another right to speedy trial. So mostly trials in sessions court are conducted on a day-to-day basis, and that's how it should be conducted. Unfortunately, in lower courts, that's not the case. It happens that, today there is a date, one witness has come, his examination in chief is over. I conduct the cross examination also, but my cross examination is just half done. I have deferred the rest. What happens is the court may give me a date after say 2 months, 3 months. The whole that I lose my grasp. Even the witness who had come, if he comes after 3 months, he is also going to forget as to what he has deposed 3 months back in the court. So it is therefore important that once the trial begins, it should be conducted on a day-to-day basis. It is not only in the interest of the prosecution, but it is also in the interest of the accused. Sometimes what happens is while cross-examination, we are successful in getting the answers that we want. We have taken the witness in the direction in which we want him to go, and suddenly it's 5:30, date is given after 2 months. So the whole purpose is lost of taking the witness towards the line which I wanted him to go. Next time when he comes, he will be in a totally different mood, and I may not get the answers which I would have got if I would have continued the cross. So right to speedy trial. Then trial in presence of, 1 minute, I'm not able to see this. Trial in presence of the accused. Yes, this is another important point. Every time there is a witness comes, prosecution witness is prosecution witness 1 is over, prosecution 2 has come in the court, and he is going to depose on that day. His chief is going to be conducted, but unfortunately the accused is in custody and he is not brought from custody. If the court proceeds with the examination in chief in absence of the accused can take an objection. He can say that why was chief conducted in my absence. So ideally in all custody matters, the accused are brought from custody if the witness is going to come. So trial has to be conducted in presence of the accused. So a lot of things matter. For example, if the accused is present in the court and the witness who has come in the court, say the prosecution witness who's come in the court, he knows the accused personally. And if the witness who has come to the court has given a false statement to the police, he may be little reluctant to say a lie in presence of the accused if the accused is present in the court. He may feel guilty that, I have lied, that this particular accused was not there at the scene of offense, but I have made a false statement before the police saying that, yes, I had seen this accused XYZ, stabbing ABC, when actually this incident had never happened. So if the accused himself is present in the court, the witness, when he has an eye contact, he may become reluctant and he may, change his stance, and he may not depose what he has stated before the police. Sometimes the witness is pressurized to give a particular statement before the police station. I'm not saying that the police is pressurizing. At times, the complainant also pressurizes the witness to give a particular kind of a statement. So all these things make a difference. Evidence to be taken in presence of the accused. This is what I just explained you, that evidence should be taken in presence of the accused. Protection against illegal arrest. So nobody can be detained. That's called illegal detention. Nobody can be detained illegally. Every accused has a right to make an application in the concerned court and say that he has been illegally arrested. Right to bail. Even during the pendency of the trial, accused has a right to make a bail application. At any point of time, he can make a bail application. It can be a temporary bail or a permanent bail. Prohibition on double jeopardy. I think all of you all must have learnt about double jeopardy. Nobody can be tried for the same offense twice. Right against self-incrimination. So every accused has a right not to self-incriminate himself. So it is, a lot of times confessional statements are taken from the accused where, accused says in that confessional statement that, yes, I had gone to this particular spot and I had kept the parcel which was given to me in the train and I knew that it contains explosives. If this kind of a confessional statement is given, in general, it is not acceptable in the court of law. It is not a substantive piece of evidence. But under certain acts, confessional statements are made admissible, like under MOCA, under UAPA. Confessional statements are made admissible. But in general, every accused has a right not to self incriminate himself. He is not required to give the details of what he has done. So these are the principles of fair trial. I think I have finished today well within time. We have the question answer sessions with the participant instead of me moving to the next topic.
Yes, ma'am. So I'll take up the questions one by one, ma'am.
Yes, yes.
Yes. So, ma'am, the first question which I can see is that whether magistrate can initiate a proceeding or take cognizance on his own, and under which section can he do that?
Yeah, he can take cognizance on his own. That is under section 190 only. 190A, 1, 2, and 3. There are three things I had explained here. So, 1 minute, I'll just read out the section to you all. Cognizance of offences by magistrates under three scenarios: upon receiving a complaint, police report, or upon information received from any person. So, this is suo motu. I had given you all an example also.
Ma'am, the next question is whether a police officer can directly file police report without registering an FIR.
He cannot start the investigation unless and until FIR is not registered. His right to investigate starts only after registration of FIR.
A has 65, this is an off-track question, but I'll take it. If A has 65 FIRs against him and was on parole, what do you think, how to maintain rule of law in this? Of course, it is not concerned with the thing which you have said, but if I may take this question as an off-road question.
What? So there are 65 FIRs against a person and he is on parole?
Yes, ma'am. So what is your take on maintaining the rule of law in such a situation?
A parole anyways is given by the concerned jail authority. So he may have been granted parole for a particular reason. Maybe there is a wedding in the family or some death or something. So parole is granted for a temporary period.
So what are the types of police report and duration to file it before a magistrate?
There is no types of police report. There is just one charge sheet.
Yeah.
Which can be filed within 60 days or 90 days depending on the offense.
Right. So can a discharge application be filed in murder and rape cases also?
Of course, why not? Every accused has a right to file discharge application. Just because the offense is serious doesn't mean that they cannot file a discharge application.
In rape cases which are filed after delay of 1 or more than 1 year, so can a discharge be taken over in such case?
It doesn't matter when has the charge sheet been filed. Once the charge sheet has been filed, I can file discharge application irrespective of when the charge sheet has been filed. That's immaterial.
Ma'am, the next question is when accused statement under section 313 is taken in a trial, I think the question is when 313 statement is taken in a trial. That is one part of the question. And second one is can discharge application be filed in summons case and under which section?
Your first query is when is a 313 statement recorded? 313 statement is recorded after all the prosecution witnesses are over.
And can the discharge application be filed in summons case and under which section he wants to know?
Ideally, there is no provision for filing discharge application in a summons case. But then we make use of section 258, that is stopping the proceedings at any time. So suppose there is a case wherein, say it's a case of medical negligence and charge sheet has been filed. No, that will be a complaint otherwise than on a police report. But in summons cases, there is no provision for discharge, but we can file an application under section 258, power to stop proceedings in certain cases. That's almost like a discharge section. So we file applications under 258.
Okay. If a discharge application is allowed, can the accused file defamation case?
Facts of each case.
Hmm.
If he has to see defamation, just because somebody is discharged doesn't mean that he was defamed. Defamation means he has to show that the particular complaint was lodged to malign his image. That has to be shown, that he was, and how he was defamed, that also has to be shown.
Oh. The next question is, what action can be taken if the trial is not conducted in the presence of accused person?
You can make an application to the concerned judge. Probably, ideally it doesn't happen every time, the advocate is present of the accused, is asked what is to be done. And if the advocate of the accused says that no, it's okay, you can proceed with recording of evidence in absence of the accused, in such a scenario, an undertaking is taken from the advocate that you will not take objection at a later stage. But in spite of advocate, opposing the recording of evidence in absence of the accused, if the judge or the concerned magistrate proceeds to record evidence, then the application can be made. Probably, we haven't come across such a scenario actually, because the judges and the magistrates usually take care of these basic formalities.
Yes.
That application can be made, and probably the accused witness can be recalled.
And the last question, ma'am, I don't know whether it's a question or not, but Vinay has asked, like A summary, B summary report, etc. I mean, I don't know what it means, but what is A summary, B summary report? I guess he wants to ask that.
Okay. So after the police has conducted investigation, and if they come to a conclusion that a particular case, this particular FIR which has been filed is false, or if they come to a conclusion that the FIR which has been lodged is true, but then they are not able to collect any evidence. Or in third scenario, what happens is they investigate the matter and they come to a conclusion that no offense is made out. In such a scenario, A, B, and C reports are filed. So in such a scenario, charge sheet is not filed.
So I think we have come to the end of the question. I think there is no more question over here. So that's all, I guess, ma'am. These are the things. So I think we can conclude now, and we come to the end of today's session. And I think, what what you have said is, you have given us a clear, detailed picture of filing of a charge sheet. We have seen the types of trials. We have seen how a fair trial can be conducted. And of course, out of the two sessions, what one can gain is that what are the rights of the accused. So he must know his rights, and that very elaborately you have given it to the participants, and you have also in detail given the procedure of the trials. So I guess a lot of information has been gathered by the participants today pertaining to the trial and the criminal practice. So thank you so much, ma'am, once again on the second day session for this wonderful explanation of all these topics. So we hope to again meet tomorrow for the last session, where ma'am is going to cover up the remaining part of criminal practice. So, ma'am, I, on behalf of Nari Gursahani, once again, thank you so much for such a wonderful, elaborated session. I'm sure the participants would have benefited, and we all will meet up tomorrow again. So, thank you to all the participants. Stay safe, stay well.